Hello, my name is Bob Liff, and this is a special edition of the CUNY Forum. Coming at the end of a day-long conference of journalists drawn from around CUNY's campuses, the Forum is a town hall-style meeting that brings together prominent New Yorkers with faculty and students at the City University. Unfortunately, today we couldn't get any prominent New Yorkers, and we're stuck with journalists instead. 6 months after the attacks of September 11th, we want to ask about the city and the news media what Ed Koch always asked about himself. How are we doing? Even as American troops remain in combat halfway around the world, the city is embroiled in debates over how to rebuild, the quality of the air downtown, and what kind of memorial is appropriate. And critics, particularly those on the left, are asking whether the media here and nationally have been muzzled, whether through outside influence or self-censorship in response to the pressures of wartime. We're joined today on what I'm sure will be a freewheeling discussion by Gerson Barrero, the editor of El Diario La Prensa, who was recently named one of the top 100 talk show hosts in America. Michael Powell, a New York-based Washington Post reporter who in his distant past once headed New York Newsday's City Hall Bureau. And Wayne Barrett of the Village Voice, perhaps the city's premier investigative reporter, who has in turn built up and torn down Rudy Giuliani's reputation.
I'm allowed to do that, right? You're not paying me, so I can do that.
Let me start with Mr. Barrero, since you are the editor in the bunch. Do the events of September 11th give Mayor Bloomberg a honeymoon that he's still able to kind of cash in on as he, after a campaign, you know, he ran a campaign as the billionaire next door. Does he have a honeymoon that's carrying over in the way people are covering him?
Well, you're speaking about a billionaire. He doesn't give a hoot what you say. He's going to take off on weekends. He's going to spend his money. It's his money. I don't give a damn.
But it's our helicopter.
No, but it doesn't matter. You know, he's paying for it one way or the other. So quite frankly, I don't know what the uproar, the upheaval is. You know, journalists, and I think, you know, as an editor, I can tell you, journalists on the one hand were disgusted by the presence of Rudy Giuliani at every chance he could get. In Spanish, we have a saying, estaba como el arroz blanco. He was like white rice and beans. Everywhere that you want, he was there. So now we're complaining about the fact that we don't know where Mike Bloomberg is. So what the hell is this? You know, I don't want the guy around. I had enough of Rudy for 8 years. So as far as I'm concerned, Mike can do it. If it's his money, get the hell lost. If something happens and it's serious enough, then he'll be in trouble. And the vote is the same way we voted him in, we'll vote him out. I think that's what democracy is all about. We're worried about nonsense, you know. We're focused on stupid things. In the meantime, where is the guy that sent, or the persons, or the gals that sent the anthrax letters? We can't find that. We can't find Osama bin Laden. This is all BS.
Thank you for that subtle and understated comment.
Is that a good opening or what? I think they all agree with me.
Mr. Powell. Attorney General Ashcroft, in talking about the anti-terrorism legislation, said, quote, "To those who scare peace-loving people with phantoms of lost liberty, my message is this: your tactics only aid terrorists." You get any sense that the aggressiveness of the press is tempered by the kind of patriotic fever connected to the war?
I think at first it was. I think that you're starting to see people crawling out from, you know, from under their desks and starting to ask some harder questions now. I think you see it in Afghanistan. I think you see it here with the civil liberties issues starting to come to the fore. And I think I do think in the first month or two, there was a sense of, yeah, you know, just essentially lock it down. And I think that, as in past times, including World War II, with the internment of the Japanese, we're starting to see a reaction to that and some real unease with that. However, I think it's interesting. I think the Bush people continue to play that. They played that today with the criticism of the war. They basically suggesting that it's unpatriotic if you don't favor an extension of our power into every country in the world. So I think that, I think it's a tension now, though. I think in the first couple months, I think there was very little tension about it. And I think it also, in fairness, it reflected something extraordinary in our history.
Yep. Mr. Barrett.
Yes.
What is the press screwing up on these days?
Well, in terms of the questions that you're discussing, I think for example, Bloomberg announces that he's going to do $1.5 billion worth of deficit financing. Hasn't happened in 30 years almost in this town. It's an extremely dangerous fiscal policy. It's something that almost brought the city to bankruptcy in the 70s.
Which we will have to pay eventually.
Yes, and none of the editorial boards are beating him up for it. The tabloids, imagine if Mark Green had gotten elected and proposed the same thing, a liberal Democrat, and the kind of beating that he would have taken in the press over this kind of a thing. I think, as a liberal Democrat, that it's irresponsible policy. And I could understand some level of deficit financing with the city being in the circumstances that it is, but this is really an extraordinary number, and it's very damaging. And of course, it only is it's only a one-shot deal. It only helps you out of a budget situation in the current year, and it doesn't do anything for the next year. You've got the same kinds of problems unless the economy has almost an immediate rebound, and yet he's gotten very little criticism. Or if you take the Pataki and Giuliani named rebuilding commission that's supposed to rebuild Lower Manhattan, it's such an anomaly. I went to a press conference and asked the mayor, whether or not he thinks he ought to have at least one member on the board of the rebuilding commission that's going to rebuild Manhattan, and he won't say anything critical about Pataki and Giuliani packing this commission before they left office. So the sitting mayor of New York really has nothing really to say about the plan to redevelop Lower Manhattan.
Do you think not covering these stories is because of the honeymoon, because of the awesomeness of the attack and the city is still breathing?
I think the seriousness of the city's problems, but I also think that he is benefiting disproportionately from this. Like I said, I believe that if Mark Green were the mayor, a liberal Democrat of the city of New York, and he had proposed $1.5 billion in deficit financing, I think he would have gotten killed in the press.
I'm also struck by coming back to the city after 5 years, in a sense, how constricted and retarded the political discourse is now. I mean, I'm struck that until a couple of people on the base of the far left, in fact, it was a third party yesterday, sort of rallied some people and suggested that perhaps after the most sort of orgasmic explosion of wealth in the city's history, that if you're going to ask people to sacrifice, if you're going to ask people to give up library hours, perhaps we might just possibly ask the wealthiest to contribute some sort of an income tax surcharge or something. I'm struck that those issues are simply, and it's not simply the press, in fairness. I mean, I think that there's something I see is happening sort of in the political culture of the city that's simply taken issues that used to be, if not front and center, very much out there as part of the discussion, and just simply made them, kind of sort of how declassed. The idea that you would talk about taxes, sort of absurd, and that, Bloomberg, you see it in Bloomberg, his ability to sort of just dismiss it out of hands. Nobody calls him on it. Nobody questions his assumptions. He says, well, the rich will flee the city. There's absolutely no indication. In fact, it strikes me there's probably every reason to think that the rich are probably the least mobile group in the city, not voluntarily the least mobile, because they have the ability to opt out of city services when they get cut. But I'm struck that again and again,
well, Mike,
these issues don't come up.
The logic of this is, he says, in a recession, in a deep, dark day of the city, you can't increase taxes. Well, when do you increase taxes? When we're in boom and we don't need the money?
There's also a little problem. There are 51 members of the city council, which majority right now is an inexperience, trying to find where their desks are and where the bathrooms are, and if they have keys for those bathrooms at City Hall. So you have a government of a inexperienced person in public life who comes from a private sector that ran whatever he wanted in the way he wanted, in the manner he wanted, having with a city council who can't come back at him. You had Mr. Gifford Miller, and he's got, he's almost as rich or maybe halfway rich as our mayor. And do they really understand what's going on in the city? And yet you have a composition of so-called minority members of the council who really are trying to find their way around the office, and never mind the budget. So I think it's taken everybody off the scope. It also has the media, which I think we do play in parts conspiracy to this, whether willingly or not, and exacerbating the whole thing about security and that, when is the next attack? Well, the next attack right now is to our pockets, and Mike Bloomberg is getting away with it, as Wayne is pointing out. And the media is not doing anything at editorial boards or anything. We have Mike Bloomberg, after going after him after the day after the election, to come back to the editorial board of El Diario. Now, this is a Spanish language newspaper who endorsed him, by the way. Yeah, we did endorse him. And, you know, so you have a problem here. He's finally coming to see us on March 7th. Now, what are we going to do? We don't know. We don't know by then if the whole city will be in a mess. We don't know if there's going to be another attack. We don't know what the hell is going to happen right now. I think that what the media has done in a very irresponsible way is not being able to explain to the city that this mayor that left City Hall, Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor, was the same dumb mayor that built this bunker and the same tower that was, you know, destroyed, demolished. And nobody's even paid attention to that. I take it back to September 11th. What did we do? We put this guy on a pedestal, not only here in New York, throughout the nation and the world. And we're not owning up to that. And so what does Bloomberg really inherit? He inherits the irresponsible fiscal mess that Rudy Giuliani had. This is really, you know, so what are we really talking about here? Our accountability was lacking from the 8 years of Rudy Giuliani, and we seem to forget that. And we expect somehow to this guy pay for all of this or be able to have all the answers. He left a mess. And look at Rudy's willingness. I call him the Pinochet of the Alcaldía. He is a Pinochet. He was a dictator. He was tyrannical, and we've seen it. He wants to take control of $100 million, putting in all his, you know, his cronies. I mean, that's disgusting. And this is America's mayor. This is the guy who saved us. He didn't save anybody. He can't save himself. Couldn't save his marriage. You know, what are we talking about? So what do we have to compare? We have Mike Bloomberg and Rudy Giuliani? Come on. Look at what we just had yesterday with Abner Luina. Isn't that disgusting that in America this happens today? That was disgusting. Are we talking about it? Are we giving it the importance? Are we saying anything with regards to that this is part of Rudy's legacy? No. This guy's a hero.
How much of it, though, is in terms of the relationship between the press and covering these things? Rudy was very dominant figure, did battle with the press, whereas Bloomberg may kind of just brush things off.
He didn't do battle with it. He kicked our ass. He wound up, you know, abusing us.
How much of that has changed, you know, the whole terms of the debate in the city? You know, you talked about the issues that would have been front and center under Dinkins.
Well, I think what he's very successfully done.
And it's something that was done nationally under Reagan.
Rudy was very good at reaching out and just changing the dial. And just saying, I'm not going to let it be turned back. So I don't see this actually as something that just started under Bloomberg. Because I mean, I got back to the city in April, and frankly, I was struck from the get-go by the change in the dialogue and how completely Giuliani and you know, you could make a case certainly for Giuliani's position, but what's striking is the extent to which the other side, that is, you know, essentially what used to be seen as the liberal half of that debate, strikes me is missing. It's missing in downtown Manhattan. There's very little talk, relatively speaking, about building affordable housing down there as part of a rebuilding plan. It strikes me as almost impossible to conceive that 20 years ago, they might not have won affordable housing, but it's almost impossible to conceive in 1980 that discussion would have gone forward without a strong voice arguing for affordable housing down there. I think there's been any number of areas, and I don't just lay that at the feet of journalists. I think there's been a sea change in the city, in part a result of an extremely strong-willed mayor, and in part a result of a city that's that for at least those who are in the middle or in the upper middle class has gotten very fat and wealthy.
But one thing that the media does is the media serves as the intermediary between this guy Giuliani or Bloomberg or whoever is speaking. They don't speak to everybody; they speak through the media.
Right.
So that's where that's where the concept of editing comes in. What you choose to put on the air, what you choose to put in the paper.
Well, let's talk about the guy who's really got all the chits. It's George Pataki right now, really, in terms, I mean, the governor has much more to do with the reshaping of Lower Manhattan and the condition of the city and what's going on here. He really not only named the commission, the Port Authority is still essentially the leaseholder with Larry Silverstein, and if Larry Silverstein, who's the developer that has the lease in the World Trade Center, wants to build anything other than the two towers that were there, he has to go to the Port Authority and get approval to do that, so that the entities that are really driving this are state entities, and the governor is really in the driver's seat as to what happens in Lower Manhattan and what are his priorities. And what does he care about? He puts in Lou Thompson, who's an old crony of his. They go back from the old days. He's never lived in New York. He's a suburbanite who practiced law with George Pataki. He's an old buddy of George Pataki's, and he's the executive director of the Rebuilding Commission. This is some kind of an indication of just how remote all this is about, really. You put in a guy like Lou Thompson, it's about contracts. This is a contract player for George Pataki. And so we don't see any sense of vision. You don't put a planner in there. You don't do something that shows that you really have a concern about redesigning and rebuilding. I don't know whether or not I agree with Mike that in the business section of Manhattan, affordable housing has to be there. I think whether or not Michael Bloomberg in his capital budget gives enough money to affordable housing around the city is a legitimate concern.
I disagree. In the first place, I think that it's no longer, first place, no longer the business center of the city. Business center of the city is Midtown. It's not to
it's
argue.
The second
it's
business
not to argue,
center.
yes,
Yeah.
the second business center. Second place, I mean, it's been, as you know, I mean, it's become over time increasingly a, you know, they call mixed use, a mix of residential and business. It strikes me as there was a reasonable, but I think in retrospect, perhaps unfortunate compromise made in the 1980s, which essentially ceded the waterfront to the wealthy. Said, you know, we're going to put the wealthy here. In return, we're going to take some of that money and we're going to rebuild, and much of it was terrific, right? We're going to rebuild Williamsburg and Greenpoint, the South Bronx, and any number of other areas. But there are other models, and you go around the country, there are other models for waterfront, and waterfront need not simply be a wealthy playground. That was, in fact, as you know, that was the original vision for Battery Park City,
right.
Was a mixed use, not, you know, not talking about, you know, public housing, but a mixed use, a mixed income area. That, it seems to me, that original master plan has been entirely lost, and I think to the extent that we've allowed the city to become a place where wealthy and middle class, forget the poor, just even wealthy and middle class, can no longer really rub shoulders except on the subway going to and from a job. We've diminished the city. And now you may disagree with me, but at the very least I think that it's striking to me that at the very least that argument has not even been joined when we're looking at the vast amount of public money that's going to be poured into Lower Manhattan.
Well, I think the issue that seems to me to be so alive is the question of whether or not the stock exchange deal goes forward as conceived by Giuliani, which means that we spend $1 billion of public money, city money. This is not something the federal government is going to pick up, to create a new stock exchange by destroying additional office space that now exists and is occupied right near the World Trade Center site. These are the kinds of issues that I think are crucial, and Dick Grasso was appointed by the mayor to the Rebuilding Commission. I think it's a fundamental conflict of interest for him to be on the Rebuilding Commission.
Who is not on the Rebuilding Commission that ought to be there?
People, New Yorkers,
for instance,
people from outside the neighborhoods. You know what the problem is in the media? We've spent so much time, with so much airtime and copy space and ink on September 11th. Quite frankly, I don't know about other New Yorkers. I'm plain sick and tired of it. Everything evolves around September 11th. What happened? We can't change it. There's nothing that can be done. Rebuilding anything on that site is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. How about talking about the other boroughs? How about talking about CUNY? How about talking about the campuses that have to be built, the schools that need some remedy? How about the worrying about the dropout rate? 1 out of every 5 high school students is dropping out. Damn it, those are real issues that New Yorkers are concerned about. Can you honestly tell me that people in the outer boroughs, except for some elite, both in the media and some developers that are willing to, you know, do whatever they have to do to get the devil's money and whatever they can to do that? Well, who talks about CUNY campuses? Who talks about the issue that as a result of September 11th, you're going to have immigrant students who are going to have to pay a higher rate because we want to keep them out? Nobody's talking about that, from the mayor to the city council to George Pataki. And that we've allowed, the media has allowed that because we put focus on the fact that somehow it's more important to who controls the dollars, who has who on the commission, who is able to get this guy or that gal in this project, and whether it's a 70-foot tower. Who the hell cares? These are phallic symbols of developers who are really short-sighted, who are intellectual midgets. and we have them all over the place. Are they really talking to New Yorkers? I'm sick and tired of covering September 11 stories. Like we're supposed to bleed our hearts and cry every day in the damn pages. You got the Daily News and the New York Times, and you got the Post and Newsday, like pictures of firefighters. I already know they died. I know the sacrifice they made. What about the 68 workers from 32BJ? Those were people that were making crap money, okay? Is anybody talking about them? I mean, come on now. These people talk like if New Yorkers was composed of all these people. Those people, those rich people that Wayne is talking about, and the cronies of Governor Pataki and Mike Bloomberg, and the billionaires like Gifford Millen, and I mean, who the hell are they? They New Yorkers? That's not New York. And we seem to do something in the media to feed this crap and build on it, and somehow this is the story of the day. You got to know the intricacies of who wants to control what board and who wants to build what. Do you really give a hoot about that? Come on now. I think people in this city don't care about any of that crap.
Should they?
They shouldn't. You know why? They have no control over it. Cronyism is going to exist and survive. It's like a bad germ that you can't kill. And it's going to happen. Corruption is going to be here. It was here from Fiorello LaGuardia and prior to him. I mean, we've had the biggest crooks in elective office. I mean, you know what I'm saying? And what the hell are we talking? You think we're going to get rid of them? This is the business of politics. This is the survival of parties. Are we talking about people's issues? Are we talking about kids? Are we talking about the abuses that are going to continue as to what happened yesterday, the reversal in a federal court that happened to Abner Luina? Who is the next African-American, Latino, Latina that's going to get some broomstick rub up their anus? Who is it? We're not talking about that. And it incenses me. And somehow the New York Times and the Post and the Daily News and El Diario and the Voice and everybody else seems to think that this is so damn important. Well, it isn't. Not to me. Not to the people that go to the newsstand and pay 50 cents every day. Those people couldn't give a hoot about that. If you talk about better housing, being able to give up opportunities, to be able to decrease tuition in CUNY, if they were doing something that attracts money in there. So that would be significant. That makes a difference. This damn thing is just nonsense that is discussed from 1 year.
That's ridiculous.
Well, it may be ridiculous. Well, because it's intellectual.
You give me a chance now?
Sure, it's intellectually stimulating for you.
No. What you're doing is you're sort of playing a cheap game. And
it's not a cheap. Why is it a cheap game?
I'll tell you why it's a cheap game. Because there are billions of dollars that are going to get poured in here. Billions of dollars that could get put into housing, that could get put into schools.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We agree then.
And in fact,
we agree.
Yeah, but you got to actually pay attention. You got to keep an eye on the ball. And actually, I would even argue that New Yorkers are capable of keeping their eye on more than one ball at one time.
Absolutely.
And I'd argue that if you care about what's happened to libraries, if you care about what's happened to CUNY,
right,
and what's happening to the cuts and the tuition and that kind of stuff, then you damn sure better care what's going on in downtown Manhattan for two reasons. One is there's going to be an enormous amount of our money poured into there. Number two, you better make sure that all that money doesn't simply go to sweetheart deals for the stock exchange. And number three, because if downtown Manhattan doesn't get rebuilt, and if frankly Midtown isn't healthy, then that's going to hurt the entire economy of the city. And as you well point out, when you got a 32BJ, you look at that World Trade Center, that was not just filled with stockbrokers.
Correct.
It was filled with a lot of working people. So if we don't figure out how we're going to do a couple of things at once and not simply talk about, well, forget about all this, that's sort of ridiculous, that's just corruption. There's a need for a certain subtlety of analysis that looks at what goes on in Lower Manhattan as part of a larger web.
I wish that it was subtle. I wish that it was appropriate and that it was in context of every other problem. That's the problem. I know that you've been out of New York for a while. And maybe if you do some catch-up, you realize that hasn't been the case since September 11th. I'm sorry to inform you that we have not focused on any of those issues. People don't give a damn about the fact of what happens to the CUNY universities. They don't. I hate to disappoint you. Everything has been focused on that. That's the problem.
I agree with you. All I'm arguing for is that you can't simply say, well, forget about what just happened. Well, that is in fact what you're arguing. If you want to argue that we need a broader vision of the city, absolutely.
But there was an opportunity to do it during the Democratic primary, and there was a guy running from the Bronx who I hated his guts, and I wrote columns against him, and I still think that he wasn't going to be an alternative. He offered a plan for the entire city, and he was ridiculed. Freddie Ferrer was ridiculed because he was talking about the entire city when he should have focused on only the World Trade Center. How do we rebuild that magnificent piece of property. And that's what I'm talking to you about.
I agree with that.
Okay, and it wasn't accepted. The editorial boards rejected it. The people didn't give him a chance to explain it. And in fact, it turned out that the great liberal hope, Mark Green, turned out not to be so liberal. He turned out to be a racist pig, just like a lot of people.
Well, what happened with Freddie's Freddie's campaign, who I believe you did wind up endorsing in the
primary.
In the primary.
That's right.
I
think that was a logical one, right?
He
had a plan that spoke about Latinos, and he's Puerto Rican. That makes sense.
And he talked, but he also talked about two cities, and when you talk,
can anybody argue that there aren't two cities in the city?
I would not disagree with what he said, but to say that openly is to confront the powers that be in the city, whether it's in the editorial boards on 43rd Street or it's anywhere else, perhaps you're confronting them with a truth that they don't want to hear. And the question is whether, since September 11th, especially in wartime, that there are other, truths that you're not willing to confront as openly.
I think obviously that the financial services industry, largely based downtown, not completely based downtown.
Well, part of it's moving over to Jersey.
Yes, has been one of the driving forces in this economy in this city for many, many years. And that if the city of New York, as a government, can't count on the revenue from the Wall Street area and from the financial services industry, that's the revenue that makes it possible to do something at CUNY, or it makes it possible to deal with so many of the social problems of the city. So I certainly think there's a connection between anybody who's looked at the budget of the city of New York knows that it is over-dependent on the financial services industry. And you certainly can't say that we can provide the services in the city of New York without reconstituting, re-energizing, salvaging, keeping in the city, drawing back to the city those who have temporarily left it, as many parts of the financial services industry as we can. I see that as the core goal of whatever is done on the World Trade Center site, and I think doing it on the World Trade Center site has citywide implications. It doesn't just affect that neighborhood, it affects the Bronx, it affects every part of the city, and so that it seems to me that whatever the plan is, I'm very concerned about the way this plan is emerging, the commission that we've talked about, but whatever the plan is, it's really a plan for the whole city. It may be a plan for one neighborhood, but it's a plan that has implications for the whole city.
But Hurston's talking about what goes on outside, what happens in the Bronx, what happens in in downtown Brooklyn. There are other business areas. There's the hub in the Bronx, there's Long Island City, there's downtown Brooklyn. Part of the debate in the immediate aftermath of September 11th that began and then just, to me, seemed to just shut down was, do you want to rebuild the financial services industry in Lower Manhattan, or should you, because basically you're a modem away from any kind of information. You don't need the physical proximity. And in fact, Bloomberg himself has said that he doesn't believe that the financial services industry is going back to the World Trade Center site. He talked about
I think that's
the
a gross
media
overstatement of what he said.
Well, no, I don't believe it.
I think he has said that there has to be other elements. He's talked about all kinds of other elements, but I don't think he's ever said that he doesn't want to see financial services as an important component part of the redevelopment and rebuilding of Lower Manhattan.
If you allow me a minute, let's stay on the island of Manhattan. It's interesting that we're talking about Lower Manhattan. Couldn't anybody move uptown a little? Like there's an empowerment zone in Harlem. Why doesn't anybody talk about Harlem?
But that debate started and stopped. That debate started and stopped.
But you know why? Because they cannot in any way, shape, or form think of or fathom that it could be Harlem or East Harlem or Central Harlem, that they dare do something like that. And so that, it tells you that this is skewed towards a certain part of the city that doesn't have the kind of housing that you're talking about, that is controlled access to a certain type of person that they deem ideal to be appropriate to live in those neighborhoods, where the financial center is safe and it's away from the hoods. So I would, for example, why not entertain the fact that maybe Central Harlem in the empowerment zone could be an alternative to all of this power in downtown Manhattan, that it would help rebuild a neighborhood and take care of what you're saying. And you don't need to bring in colored folks in there because they live there already. But no, this is beyond then. This is beyond the comprehension. But it is an intentional comprehension of exclusion. So then there is no desire, even as much as we would care to, actually focus and make it, as Wayne suggests, that what happens in downtown is going to impact all the boroughs. I would argue with you. I would argue the fact, and God knows you know about corruption, because I think the master book was written in City for Sale. I mean, that was when you wrote about the
which created Rudy Giuliani.
Which, right. He was responsible for that. He, you know, he played up. Him and Jack Newfield did that. But seriously, I mean, I'm really, get the book City for Sale. I mean, it's a textbook operation in how the city really works and who survives and who are the players now. I mean, you own up to that much, right?
I do.
Okay.
And when I gave Herson his copy, he recently reminded me. He was at the book party when it came out in 1989, and when I gave him his copy, I inscribed it, "You can write the sequel about the Ferrer administration."
It's true. It's true. I'm going back to my third reading. He actually wrote that, and I didn't get a chance. Damn it.
Why do you think that debate stopped? I mean, because it was... Because I remember we had a CUNY Forum here where Carl Weiss, part of the Downtown Business Alliance, was saying we have to keep everything down here, and we had Virginia Fields.
I got the answer. You know why? Because there's all white men talking about it. There's all white men talking about this thing. Who's in there of color?
I don't know. I don't think it's just a racial question.
Oh no?
No. I think.
Okay, find me one Latino or a black man that's on that discussion right now. Tell me of one person. Dispersal of the financial services industry is not an argument that's in the interest of... Is Richard Parsons a black person?
Within the city.
Is Richard Parsons involved?
Can I finish the thought?
Yeah, sure.
Dispersal is not an argument that's in the interest of the city of New York, because if you're going to say you don't need a financial services district, then they can go to Jersey. They can go to Connecticut. They can leave town altogether. Now, this is not to say that some back offices, we've been trying to get back offices, and some of them have done it, of the major financial services houses, have moved their back offices, their clerical staff and so forth.
That's what Metro is.
Yes, into other places and into outer boroughs. There's nothing wrong with that, but we still, I think it's clearly in the interest of the city of New York, and by that I do not just mean white men who work downtown. I think it's in the interest of the entire city of New York to have a vibrant financial services sector in the city of New York, located where it has been located for hundreds of years, you know.
But wait,
it's already half moved to Midtown.
Some of it can move to Midtown, and I'm not. But clearly, this is the financial services capital of the world. Don't we want to keep that? Isn't that a plus for our town? Isn't it a good thing? I think it is. And what we can do as a result of this attack to salvage it is extremely important.
Let me go to. Do we have a question? Let me
yes.
Identify yourself, if you would.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a CUNY professor of journalism from the College of Staten Island.
And you are?
And my name is Fred Kaufman. Thank you. And I also happen to live a block and a half from Ground Zero. I can assure you that my neighbors are of every color of the rainbow in the building where I live. I think it's quite offensive that you're making this a discussion about color. I can also tell you that I'd like to know why, after what is really the greatest event of air pollution in the history of North America, why the press has been so reticent to discuss the environmental concerns of that area, and even to cover the Senate hearings that Clinton and Lieberman put together, and Jerry Nadler has made this his #1 issue. Yet I don't see hide nor hair of a word in the press. And I can also assure you that...
Well, you've seen Juan Gonzalez's columns in the news, obviously.
He was the first one to actually raise.
Yes, but let me tell you, nobody has really taken the EPA to the mat, and it's really outrageous that they have yet to set a single standard for the quality of indoor air for my 30,000 residential neighbors downtown. Maybe you can address why you guys have not been dealing with that issue. Thank you.
It gives me a chance to say why you guys in the media haven't addressed that issue.
Well, Juan Gonzalez was the first one to write about it. Right. And when he actually came out with this, I remember George Pataki trying to respond, and Dr. Antonia Novella, the State Commissioner of Health, coming in and denying that there was any concern for health. You remember that one?
I certainly do, and now it's clear this is an evolving story, although I hear from some people up there that we'd like this story to perhaps go away. This is an evolving story for the people who live in that neighborhood. But it is now clear that, in fact, there must be some standards set, not only for the outdoor air, it's one of the most highly aerated areas in the world.
You're absolutely correct.
But for indoor air, and nobody is on this at all.
And I will take you across the bridge in Williamsburg and take you to Los Sures, the south part of Brooklyn, and where they have something called the Toxic Avengers, which works out of El Puente, and I'll take you to the South Bronx. For the past 25 years, they've been dealing with dump sites that have affected. It has the highest rate of sufferers of asthma because of pollution. I didn't hear any concern by anyone either. I've been covering that story in El Diario La Prensa since I'm editor and prior to me for at least 15 years. And I didn't hear any concern about people saying, so all of a sudden the September 11th thing becomes a problem there. I'm telling you, that's people breathing that kind of crap on a daily basis in the South Bronx and in Williamsburg. So I understand, I'm not trying to be insensitive or uncaring. The reality is that what is of concern for that area right now because of a terrorist attack has been actually present because of the terrorist neglect of city administrations.
Well, and
nobody gave a damn. Well, and there were hearings held, and there have been Congress people doing it, and there haven't been people in Washington concerned, and the increase in the South Bronx, it is at an alarming rate that is tops in the Northeast, and I think it will probably surpass in the nation, except some parts of the South. I didn't hear nobody doing things about that.
I think that, to speak in defense of my former business, I think that the issues of asthma have been covered extensively in the Daily News. I mean, they had a whole series of asthma kind of forced. It was kind of the Daily News at its best, if you will, forcing the city to confront an issue. That the issues of garbage transfer stations and the proposed incinerator in the Brooklyn Navy Yard was extensively covered. I think the tougher question.
By Bob Liff.
I covered a number of those stories, myself. Now, of course, I've gotten honest work. But the tougher question is: do people want that story to go away?
No.
That's the tougher.
But
question.
It's a different.
Why hasn't Juan's stories caused more of a flap?
Well, I think
we got to ask Mort Zuckerman and his interests.
Yeah, but I first of all, I plead guilty, and I think it is a legitimate story. I think it should be more covered. I certainly haven't written about it, and have followed it very carefully. I actually watched the hearings on television, and they were. I found the case to be unpersuasive. Really, I don't think Nadler made a convincing case. I watched the whole thing on television. Not that excuses me from not reporting it. There may be it seems to me, and this is the problem with a story like this. It depends so much on scientific evidence. Reporters can't go out and get it. They have to rely on the scientific evidence that's provided by experts. And within the EPA, you've got two totally conflicting voices on this, one saying there is no problem and one saying there is a grave problem. This makes it very difficult for reporters to sort it out and deal with it. I'm not excusing myself, but it's very difficult to sort out.
Actually, I will say, following up on Juan Gonzalez, we didn't invent the wheel here. He invented the wheel, and
he was ahead on the story.
But we did a long piece in the Washington Post on it, and in fact, one of the main pieces of that was looking at what the EPA did, and I don't think it's possible to conclude anything other than that they lied in the first days. They may have thought they were doing. And I think it's actually quite possible. They thought they were doing God's work, just calm people down, everybody's fleeing, everybody's freaking, you don't want to get people panicked. But in fact, they were stating emphatically, not once, not twice, but a dozen or more times, that the air was safe. In the first instance, somewhat more forgivable, somewhat vaguely more forgivable, when they didn't know, when they absolutely would have had no way of knowing. More unforgivably, they continued to say it was safe when they knew, and this isn't a matter of conjecture. I mean, the tests are there. When their own tests were showing you know, by the late September, that there were very dangerous levels of contaminants in the air, they continued to insist it was safe.
In the air where? You have to really define the zone. And where are you talking about?
They
Well,
were
if you live in
saying,
Battery Park City, that's certainly within any
for those
zone.
who lived around Battery Park City.
At some point, it became fairly clear, though, from the EPA tests that outside of the immediate ground zero area.
But that's where they were talking about, because it was the concern of those people who lived right down, you know, right down in.
No, but I'm talking about Battery Park City. What is your sense of the condition of the air in Battery Park City now?
I don't have a sense right now. I know, in fairness to the questioner, if I lived there, I guess I'd have an awful hard time believing EPA because they flat out lied. They didn't. It wasn't. They didn't obfuscate.
Absolutely.
They didn't hedge. They flat out stated it was safe when they didn't know that, and then they stated that it was safe when they knew otherwise. So I don't know. I guess my suspicion is that the air, certainly that the air, as opposed to perhaps stuff that's been trapped inside, perhaps is getting better because the fires are out. But that's a suspicion. All I'm saying is that you can't, you know, we all struggle, and in this case the EPA does, with the legacy of what, you know, the EPA has a legacy right now, unfortunately for them. And that legacy is that they have, you know, they spent a good part of the fall misrepresenting what the quality of the air was downtown.
Well, and
I think it does raise questions, frankly, about what they say about other parts of the city.
But that's why the reason I jumped on the question of are people shying away from the stories, that goes right to the heart of how the media is or is not cowed in some way, pulling punches in some way. I mean, is there, because there was a concern, let's not get people any more upset than they already are? Is that so I mean, those kinds of questions I think are raised very effectively by the questioners.
There was an interesting hearing, if I recall, was it less than 2 months ago in this gentleman's neighborhood, and I think it was it was really it was raucous. I think it should have been even more so. And people confronting officials, and nothing has been done. Jerry Nadler has done an excellent job. I don't think it's a matter of convincing or not. I just think that this is not the focus. This is not the interest. They could care less if they die breathing all that air, really. They're concerned about building towers and where the financial center is located. And that is where I think the problem is, that there is no concern for the human being. We're concerned about grieving those that perish and making them part of the story so that we feel bad and let these hoods do whatever they want, and not concerned about the survival of people that have to breathe this crap every day. So that's, I think, where we have been neglectful.
Let me go to another questioner. Yes, sir.
My name is Samuel Sakifio. I'm a math tutor at Manhattan Community College, part of the City University, and we graduate a lot of African Americans. My question to you is, what is happening with the budget of the City University? When are we going back to free tuition for the city? Thank you.
Never.
I would tell you, as somebody who went to Brooklyn College, when in fact we paid $30 and then $50 a semester in order to attend Brooklyn College. Has that, the question of free tuition, also the question of immigrant students being forced to pay out of state, or I guess undocumented immigrant students being forced to pay out of state tuition. Does CUNY, as a lot of other, my daughter just started kindergarten, a lot of other public institutions get lost in the shuffle of post-September 11th? I mean, are they taking the brunt of this $4 billion gap that the mayor is trying to fill?
You know something, when answering that question, I don't know about you, Wayne, but I feel pretty guilty. My daughter is on an out-of-state college, and so is Wayne's son, so I don't know about that. And
no, he's New York, Colgate.
He isn't?
Upstate.
Oh, he is? Oh, okay. I thought he was, okay, so I take that back. Look, I don't know the response to that. I don't think that there will ever be free tuition. I don't think that there's, even in an affordable tuition of people that this college, the City University of New York, is really supposed to attract. I think that an attempt is being made to be able to accommodate them and be more flexible, but I think the realities of the economy are such, and the unwillingness of right now, for example, I think that comes into play, and the waste that we have in the public education system right now, whether we abolish the Board of Education and that, with these 7 individuals who seem to detach themselves. I heard Ninfa Segarra making these statements today. This is a woman who's been on the Board of Education for 10 years. And she's also pointing the fingers at someone. Wait a minute, it's you that was there. And all this waste, I mean, you know, the figures that come out. Can you imagine a $300,000 study to be able to find out why they're not hiring enough minorities? I think that's disgusting. And when people have to pay higher tuition. In terms of CUNY, some of that money should be taken away from the Board of Education and do something. So it's the way that we handle the budget, we handle the finances of the city and the state that is all screwy, and we're focused on so many other things that we don't pay enough. I think we should hire more people that know finances into elective office than what we have right now, because certainly they don't understand anything other than what they can get for themselves or their own self-survival. So I don't think it's ever going to come back.
But this gentleman is from BMCC, which has been directly impacted by the attack, and I think yes, Fitterman Hall is one of the buildings at BMCC, and it was destroyed literally by the collapse of 7 World Trade Center on top of it. And I just think that's an example of some of the issues that Gerson's been talking about, because you look at this as a student population that's virtually entirely minority, and you compare the treatment in the media or the treatment in budgetary terms with Stuyvesant High School, which is right across the street, and look at the differences in the student bodies and what has happened in terms of the constant coverage, the concerns about air quality in the schools. But no one was concerned about air quality at BMCC. I think the students were back within a week and a half.
Well, the students actually now are going to school.
3 weeks.
Half of them are going to school at City College.
Professor indicating 3 weeks.
They're actually now going to school, half of them with City College.
So it brings out, I think that's a location right in the heart of it that brings out some of the contradictions that Gerson was referring to earlier.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, my name is Stephen Hager. I'm from the College of Staten Island. I'm a senior majoring in communications. I'd like to talk a little bit more about who seems to be your favorite person at the moment, Mike Bloomberg. It hasn't been that long in the press. They were talking about his plan for the bridges, for the Brooklyn Bridge and Manhattan Bridge as far as tolls. Now, those tolls are taxes that are being levied upon people from Brooklyn and Queens. I'm not a Staten Islander originally. I moved there from Brooklyn 2 years ago. But we in Staten Island have been paying those kind of taxes for years.
My favorite reaction to earlier proposals to put tolls on the Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Williamsburg Bridge was from Borough President Howard Golden, who said he might agree with it if they put the toll booths on the Manhattan side. So I mean, but there's an example of a revenue-generating idea that, you know, certainly it seems to me would have some pretty amazing traffic implications.
It has enormous traffic implications. Well, where does it come from? Because it's not just residents of the city of New York that are going to pay that. It's some form of taxation on commuters who are getting an absolute free ride in this town, and Bloomberg will not support an increase in the commuter tax.
Reimposition of the commuter tax.
Yes, a reimposition of the commuter tax. So in lieu of that, it seems to me, he came up with this idea, because it was simultaneous that he was saying he would not, even though Gifford Miller has supported an increase in or a restoration of the commuter tax, even though Sheldon Silver in the Assembly finally indicated that he might be persuaded that a commuter tax,
after helping kill it.
Yes, after helping kill it, could be reinstated. So he's come up with something that is at least some form of taxation, and I think you've represented it correctly, some form of taxation on commuters, and that is a silver lining for me. That's a silver lining in that proposal. Even
well, that's really a fee as opposed to a tax, for one thing. So there are differences there. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, I guess I think it points to a certain constricted dialogue in the city. And I think if you're going to talk about sacrifices in the city, it's perfectly fair to ask that those sacrifices be spread as near as one can equally across classes. And, you know, simply imposing a toll, it strikes me as a very sort of gross instrument. It's a very blunt instrument. Anyway.
Yes, sir. We have about 8 minutes. I want to try to move through some questions.
My name is Malik Turner. I'm a current student of BMCC and a current resident of Midtown. and I want to address the issue of the air quality. When I was in BMCC, well, still am, 3 weeks after the 9/11, they had us back in school. And I found out recently, only recently, that the only reason we rushed back into school 3 weeks after, because if we lost one more week, they would have had to cancel the whole semester. That issue was never addressed. Even though Stuyvesant was not returned to school, even though the PS school, elementary school, was not returned, we were forced back into school or we lost a semester. No one addressed that issue. At that point in time when 9/11 occurred, I was working for Department of Health, New York Department of Health, and I actually worked Ground Zero, about a half a block away from Ground Zero, at one of the restaurants, Chinese restaurants, and the air quality was so, this was no more than a week after the actual 9/11, less than a week. We were inside the restaurants, cleaning out the restaurants because it was becoming a hazard, because they already had people inside the train stations, and the smell and the aroma or the air quality or whatever inside the train station was so horrible that they had to call Department of Health to come down and help and clean out everything in a 4-block radius, because it had lost complete power, as everybody down in the Valley area had lost complete power also. No one addressed those issues. It was talked about very briefly.
And the media,
and then it
obviously,
was
is the one
gone.
who should have addressed those issues.
Yeah. Then or now, it still hasn't been addressed. They brought it up, they spoke about it, quick second or two, gone. Nobody's, to this day, nobody's still speaking about it. As you said before, we lost the building, the Fitterman building, so they took everything that we had, as in like community, after-school programs, so on and so forth, gone. We have no gymnasium. Our gymnasium has been cut in half because simple fact that they had to make classrooms. So anything that this money is supposed to be invested to in CUNY Board of Ed, how come any money hasn't been invested back into BMCC? Okay. How come any money, how come the air quality, to this point, they're still taking barges behind Stuyvesant School, and they're taking all the debris from 9/11 and they're going through it. So you're telling me the air quality is okay even though these barges are bringing stuff right into the behind our school?
Well, it's not only that they're not putting anything into BMCC to compensate for the problems. BMCC is going to have to suffer the same budget cuts. They've been suffering budget cuts in the middle of this process. So it's compounding the problems. It seems to me that BMCC is a primary example of how the city of New York, and as I've been talking a lot today about the state of New York, it's the City University is obviously primarily a state system, a state-controlled system. How the two entities are not doing something that is particularly targeted BMCC in terms of providing additional resources that will help. Now, I know that the CUNY has applied for a FEMA grant to rebuild Fitterman Hall from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and whether or not that's approved, whether or not they get the money they need to do it, but this is a critical thing for that neighborhood. It's a critical thing for the CUNY system, and I think that the student raises all kinds of questions about just how discriminated against as an institution it has been since September 11th. How many students? I think 10 students died. There were certainly a number of students who died that were students at BMCC in the attack.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Martha Bright from the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College, and I want to bring up another kind of issue that nobody has addressed around the sexism and the obvious and blatant racism that I found terribly offensive that the media did not take on, and that was the fact that the Chief Executive Officer of the Borough of Manhattan is C. Virginia Fields. No one took no one in the media really took it on the fact that she was blatantly ignored. She was not shown on television every 2 hours in the updates and so forth. There was Giuliani, Pataki, Carrick, and others. But this woman, who is the CEO of Manhattan, her name didn't come up. People, a lot of people didn't even know about her, and I found it offensive. Only the Amsterdam News said anything about that.
Do you think that might have been different if this event had happened in Queens? I mean, or do you think Giuliani was such an incredibly dominant personality who was not lending himself to kind of, he wasn't big on sharing?
Totally ignored her and her domain.
Would they have similarly ignored a white borough president if it happened in Queens?
I don't think it would have been that blatant. I mean, the whole world was looking at Manhattan. And I just could not. I kept saying, well, who is going to include C. Virginia Fields? And it just, nobody ever even raised the issue.
To me, it's much more important question in the rebuilding process than it is in the emergency service.
Her name is not coming up with this either.
Yeah, that's where I think you have a
nothing.
much more legitimate complaint, because in terms of the immediate events of September 11th, it doesn't surprise me on this international stage that the borough president, who has very limited powers, wasn't part of the process, but she should be very much. She should be very much a part of the process in the rebuilding.
Post 9/11, and still nothing.
I think part of that, of course, is a function of Giuliani not being very big on
not playing well with others.
Not playing well with others. I mean, I've been doing some work with the Bronx Borough President Adolfo Carrion, and on his first day in office, January 2nd. I was up in his office, and there was a car accident in which 3 school safety officers had a truant, and they had a car accident, and all 4 people were injured, and they took him to Jacoby Hospital, and I was sitting with Adolfo. We heard that Commissioner Kelly was going up to Jacoby. I said, "Come on, let's go. Let's go see what's going on." And Adolfo at the time was on crutches because he had broken his leg at Thanksgiving.
Actually, it was Roberto Ramirez who did that.
Well, we went up, and it's a separate forum. We went up and we went and we met with the hospital people. We met with Kelly, and then they went out to do a press conference. And Kelly said, "Come on, Adolfo, stand next to me." And he did this press conference, and he deferred to the borough president. And that simple courtesy likely wouldn't have happened over the last 8 years. So I think part of what we have is we have a different atmosphere. I don't know politically how different it is in terms of the substance of the policies, but in terms of the atmospherics under Giuliani.
Well, you were asking before who should be on the commission. Well, why doesn't the Manhattan Borough President have some appointees on a commission in her own borough? I think that's exactly who should be naming some people to this commission.
The question, though, is the question I'm raising is to what degree the change in atmospherics surrounding Michael Bloomberg, who is working to his benefit. Because the hostility, I mean, you're seeing some problems. You know, he is still a little bit thin-skinned, it seems to me. Some of the stuff on where he goes on weekends and those kinds of personal questions, which arguably are not kind of core policy questions. But we only have about a minute left. It seems to me that the atmospherics have an era of good feeling, and the question is how long that'll last. We have very brief time. So.
I say bring Ed Koch back. He's the one that started this question. How we doing? Bring Ed Koch back.
Well, how are we doing? In 2 words.
I think New York is really doing as best as it can, and it's still to be defined, and it's being written on a daily basis. It's a blank sheet of paper, and I think that the problem is that we've given too much power to those that have really empowered themselves by taking it.
How are we doing?
Well, 5 months after the events of September 11th, to have no idea where we're going, and I don't think we have any idea where we're going, seems to me we're moving at a snail's pace.
How are we doing? Quickly.
Yeah, I think downtown there's a real need to diversify, not simply in terms of race, but in class and almost any way you want to look at it. The planning body for what goes on down there, because that's going to determine the future of the city in some important way, whether we like it or not.
So ultimately the answer to the question is a question, but it's how are we doing? Is who knows?
Who knows? He's moving back, as a matter of fact.
I want to thank everybody.
I grew up here.
That's right. Although he is a New Yorker. He may work for the Washington Post, but I sat next to him at City Hall for many, many years. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and this has been a special edition of the CUNY Forum, and thank you very much.